The lantern swung when she pushed the barn door open, and the light went across the hay in a slow arc, and that was how she saw him. The arc of the lantern catching leather, and then the stillness of a person lying in a way that a person does not lie when they are sleeping. She crossed the barn in 8 steps. She knelt beside him. She put 2 fingers to his neck, the way she had been doing with living things for 40 years, and she found the pulse, faint, irregular, not what she wanted, but there. She looked at the leg, which was angled wrong. She looked at the arm, which had a laceration through the leather that was still seeping in the cold. She looked at his face, which had the gray-white color of someone whose core temperature had dropped below the point where the body stops fighting effectively. She stood up. She looked at the barn door, where the snow had drifted to her knee and the sky beyond was the flat black of a Montana January at 5:30 in the morning, and the county road, where she could see in the distance, was not a road anymore. She made her decision in the time it takes to exhale. She went back to the house, and she came back with everything she had. What happened over the next 3 days, the fire built in the barn stove, the wound cleaned and dressed with what she had in the farm first aid kit and the vet supply cabinet, the leg splinted with materials that were not designed for a person, but worked for a person, because bones are bones. The watching and the waiting and the calculation of whether what she was managing was getting better or getting worse was not something Mabel Cross was unfamiliar with. She had spent 40 years keeping living things alive. She had never done it for a person before. She froze for 1 step when she first knelt beside him, the specific freeze of someone recognizing the scale of what they are looking at. And then she moved. She kept him alive. She did it alone, in a Montana barn, in January. 6 months later, 63 motorcycles came down the county road and turned into her lane. Garrett Ross had been riding since noon on a Tuesday in January, heading north from Billings on the county highway, and the storm had moved in from the northwest faster than the forecast had suggested, and faster than he had planned for, which was not like him. He was 44 years old and a road captain, and he did not make the mistake of underestimating Montana weather. But the visit to his sister Ruth had gone better than expected, and he had stayed 2 hours longer than he planned. Because when a thing you have been trying for 3 years finally happens, you do not leave immediately. He and Ruth had not spoken properly since their mother's death in 2021. When a disagreement about the estate had become something larger than the estate, and it stayed large for 3 years. He had driven to Billings in December and knocked on Ruth's door without calling ahead, which she had told him later was both annoying and the only thing that would have worked. They had talked for 4 hours. They had arrived at the place where things get put down. He had ridden home on a Tuesday in January with something resolved in his chest that had been unresolved for 3 years, and the storm had come up faster than he planned for, and the county road had iced under his tires at dusk, and the bike had gone into the ditch at 42 miles per hour. He was conscious after the crash. He was not conscious for long. He remembered the cold of the snow under his hands. He remembered crawling in a direction that he believed was toward a light, though the snow was heavy and the light was not consistent. He remembered a door, and warmth, and hay, and then nothing for a long time. He was a big man, 6'2", 220 pounds, with the build of someone who had done physical work his entire adult life, and the road captain's patch on his cut that he had been wearing for 9 years. He had close-cropped hair shot through with gray and a scar across his chin from a crash at 31 that had not been this bad. He was chapter president of the Montana chapter now. Had been for 6 years, and he was the person his chapter brought things to. And the thing he had not anticipated was that one January night, he would be the thing that needed bringing. His private weight was Ruth. 3 years was a long time. He had spent the ride back thinking about the 3 years and what they had cost both of them, and about the conversation on Tuesday that had put the cost in perspective. He had been thinking about this when the road went out from under him. He would think about it again, much later, with different feelings. Before we get to what Mabel Cross did over those 3 days, and what 63 riders thought was a sufficient answer to it, 6 months later, hit subscribe and drop your city and state in the comments. I want to see where this story reaches today. A kitchen in Wyoming, a living room in Nebraska, a front porch in New Brunswick. Leave your city. I read every one. And if you know what it is to look at a crisis and make a decision without knowing whether you're equipped to make it, this story is for you. Stay with us. Because what Mabel Cross knew and what she didn't know, and what she did anyway, is the most important part of everything that follows. Mabel Cross was 67 years old. She had worked as a veterinary nurse for 31 years at a practice in Crestview, Montana, beginning when she was 25 and continuing until she retired at 56 to help Carl manage the farm full-time. She had spent those 31 years caring for injured and sick animals, which meant she had spent 31 years developing the specific competence of someone who cannot always get to a specialist in time and must act on what she knows and what she has. She had delivered foals and calves in conditions that would have surprised a city vet. She had managed infection in a cattle dog 4 hours from an emergency clinic. She had made the calls, hundreds of times, about what was an emergency and what was manageable, and what was something in between those two things that required her full attention, and everything in her kit. She and Carl had bought the farm in 1988, 40 acres on the county road outside Crestview, with a hay barn, a horse barn, a house that needed more work than the listing suggested, and a view of the foothills that Carl had described as worth every dollar of the extra work. They had a quarter horse named Dancer, and 2 paints, and a small operation of the kind that sustains itself if you are efficient and don't have surprises. Carl died in the fall 4 years ago. Heart failure, at 71, in the barn, doing what he had always done and had always said was the right way to go if you had a choice about it. Mabel had found him. She had sat with him for a while before she called anyone, because she had things to say to him that required the time. She managed the farm alone since then. Her daughter Patty lived in Portland and called on Sundays, and had offered to come and help, and had been told, genuinely, that Mabel was fine. She was fine. She managed, the way she had managed everything, with the specific efficiency of someone who has been keeping track of things that matter for decades and knows which problems to address first. When she found Garrett Ross in her barn at 5:30 in the morning on a Wednesday in January, she assessed him with the same competence she had applied to everything in her practice. Broken leg, she could splint it. Hypothermia, she knew the protocol. Laceration, she could manage the wound. The question was the irregular pulse and what it meant. And she monitored it through the first night with her fingers at his wrist and her watch, and the farm's medical reference manual she had kept from the practice, which had a section on hypothermic cardiac irregularity that she read twice. She did not sleep on the first night. She sat beside him with the lantern turned low, and when he was restless, she spoke to him the way she had spoken to 1,000 animals in 1,000 difficult nights, not to convey information, but to convey presence. The specific communication that says, I am here and I am not leaving. Between those times, the barn was silent in the particular way of a barn at night. The horses breathing, the wind against the boards, the fire in the stove, and she sat in that silence, and she watched his pulse, and she kept her notes. She whispered it the same way every time. You're all right. Stay with me. She had said these words to horses and dogs, and once to a mountain lion cub that hadn't made it. And she said them to Garrett Ross through the first night in her barn, and through the second night, and into the third. His hands were trembling the first night, the specific fine tremor of a body trying to regulate its own temperature, and she tracked it, and by morning the trembling had stopped, which was a good sign, and she noted it in her documentation and made her coffee and went on. On the second day, the wound developed the specific heat that meant infection was beginning. She had antibiotics in the vet cabinet, not the same formulation as the human equivalent, but close enough in mechanism that she made the call, which was the call a woman who had spent 31 years making calls made. She documented everything, the way she had always documented, because documentation was how you tracked whether you were winning. She was winning by the third day. His temperature had come back to normal. The pulse had settled. The wound was responding. When he first opened his eyes and looked at her, there, fully present, the specific clarity of someone who has come back from somewhere far, she was changing the dressing on his arm, and she said, "You're in Mabel Cross's barn outside Crestview. You've been here 2 days. Your chapter knows where you are." She had found his emergency contact in his wallet, and she had called the chapter's emergency line on day 2 when the signal had cleared enough. She had told them he was alive, and she was keeping him that way, and she would call when the roads opened. She had told them that in the specific voice of a woman who did not need to be told that she was doing the right thing. On day 3, Ed Whitaker drove them both to the hospital in Crestview. Garrett had surgery for the leg. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. He came home to his chapter and he told them everything. The winter after the crash was hard in the specific way of Montana winters that come after something else has already taken a toll. The barn heating system had failed in February. The unit that Carl had maintained himself for 12 years, repaired twice with parts he ordered from a supplier in Missoula, had finally declined past the point that Mabel's knowledge of it could address. She had called 2 heating companies. The first had quoted her a number that required planning she hadn't done yet. The second had not called back. She had been managing with a propane space heater in the horse section of the barn, which kept the horses alive through February and March, but which was not adequate for the space. In April, a county animal welfare inspector had come to the farm in response to a complaint from a passing driver who had seen the space heater through the barn window and noted it in a call to the county office. The inspector had been professional and not unkind. He had noted that the heating arrangement was insufficient for the number of animals housed and that the situation needed to be addressed. He had given her 60 days. She had not told Patty. She had not told anyone. She had told Ed, who lived 4 miles east and who had been checking on her since Carl died. Ed had told her it would work out. He had believed this. He did not know how. Garrett had called Ed in March to ask how Mabel was doing. Ed had told him about the horses and the barn and the inspection notice. Garrett had been quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he had said, "I'll handle it." He had not meant only the heating system. He had been in his workshop since February. The workshop was attached to his house in Helena, and it was where he went when he had something to work through. A piece of wood, a design he had been thinking about. The specific meditative focus of a man who has learned that making something with his hands is one of the few activities that quiets the chapter president part of his brain and gives him access to the other parts. He had been a woodworker since he was 22, when a chapter brother had taught him on a winter when neither of them had anywhere pressing to be. He had seen the rocking chair when Ed had driven him to Mabel's house on the 3rd day before the hospital to collect a few things. The chair was on the porch. 2 chairs, actually. one in good condition, and one with a broken arm and a cracked slat in the seat. The broken one was the one that faced the foothills. He had not asked about it. He had remembered it. He asked Mabel about it in January, after the hospital, when he had been able to call her properly. She had said it was Carl's chair, and the arm had broken in a wind in 2022, and she hadn't gotten to it yet. She had said it in the voice of someone who says things like that. Hadn't gotten to it yet. And does not say that the getting to it requires sitting in a chair that held Carl's shape for 30 years, and deciding whether the act of repair is itself something she is ready for. Garrett had said nothing more about it on that call. He had spent 4 months making the restoration. He had sourced matching wood from a salvage company in Missoula. He had repaired the arm and replaced the cracked slat and refinished the whole chair in a stain that matched the original. He had worked slowly, on purpose, because the chair deserved it. He called the chapter in April. He told them what he needed done on a Saturday in June and what he was bringing. He said the whole chapter was going. Nobody said they couldn't make it. Engines. 63 of them, coming down the county road outside Crestview on a Saturday morning in June at 7:45, the sound of them building before Mabel could see them. The specific sound of many motorcycles in formation on a straight Montana road in early summer. The kind of sound that has no precedent in her lane and no mistaking for anything else. She heard them from the kitchen, where she was on her second cup of coffee, and she put down the cup and went to the window. The column came off the county road and into her lane, filling it, the lane that Carl had graveled himself in the spring of 1990, and they pulled into the yard and along the fence line, and some of them parked in the field margin. And they cut their engines in sequence as they settled, each silence adding to the one before it, until the yard held 63 machines, and the morning was quiet enough to hear the horses in the barn and the wind in the cottonwoods along the east fence. Garrett came to her door. He was walking without the cane he had needed through March, which was the first thing she noticed. The walk was his own again, the specific weight-forward deliberateness of a big man who has spent his life not hurrying. He was carrying something, a chair, wrapped in a blanket, carried in his arms. Mabel opened the door before he knocked. She looked at the chair. She looked at Garrett. He set it down on the porch and he unwrapped the blanket, and the chair sat in the morning light, and she saw it. Carl's chair, the arm repaired, the finish renewed, the slat replaced, the whole of it restored in the specific way of something that has been given 4 months of careful attention by someone who understood what it was. Her chin came down. She did not speak for a moment. The porch was silent, the morning, the chair, and the two of them. "How did you know?" she asked. "Ed," Garrett said, "and you told me about it. In the barn. Second night." She looked at him. "I don't remember telling you. You talked a lot second night," he said. "Keeping me awake." She looked at the chair. Something broke in her at the specific warmth of a thing returned, not Carl, but something that held his shape, repaired, on the porch where it belonged. "Come in," she said. "I'll make more coffee after," Garrett said. He turned toward the yard. He said something to the chapter, not loudly, not dramatically, and the 63 riders put on their work gloves, and the trucks that had followed the column down the county road began to open. The chapter worked from 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The barn heating system was the first priority. A chapter member named Lou, who had run an evac company in Billings for 12 years, had the materials in his truck and 3 helpers who knew what they were doing, and the installation was completed by 11:30. Lou called the county inspector's office from the yard when it was done and told him it was ready for inspection. The fence lines came next, the section that had gone down in the January storm and that Mabel had been patching with borrowed posts since February. 16 men worked the fence from the barn to the east boundary, while another group split and stacked the winter's worth of wood that had been cut but not yet properly stored. The hay barn door, which had been hanging wrong since November on a hinge that had bent in the storm, was rehung before noon. Mabel made coffee in batches and brought it out. She brought sandwiches. She walked the property with Lou when the heating inspection cleared. The inspector had driven out that afternoon and had found everything in order, and had told Mabel in the specific tone of someone who was relieved not to have to escalate a situation that the notice was resolved. He had been decent about it. He had looked at the yard full of men and the trucks and said, "Before he left, you've got good people around you, Mrs. Cross," she had said. "I do." At 4 o'clock, the chapter sat in her yard with whatever they wanted from the cooler that had appeared from somewhere, and the June afternoon settled around them, and Mabel sat on the porch steps with her coffee and looked at the farm. The fence was right. The wood was stacked. The barn was warm. The door hung straight. She looked at Carl's chair, which was sitting in its place with the arm repaired and the finish catching the late light. Garrett came and sat on the steps beside her. She said, "How is Ruth?" He looked at her. He had not expected the question. "Good," he said. "We talk now." "Good," she said. They sat for a while. The chapter left at 5. They loaded the trucks, and they shook hands with Mabel on the porch. Each one of them, 63 of them, some of them a nod, and some of them a word, and all of them the specific deliberateness of people who have come somewhere on purpose and are acknowledging that purpose before they go. Garrett came last. He said, "If you need anything," she said, "I know." He nodded. He put on his helmet. He walked to his bike, the chapter's engines starting around him, one by one, the sound of them filling the June evening and carrying out across the foothills and the long flat of the county road that ran east toward Crestview and north toward Billings and all the places the road went from here. The column moved. It went out of the lane and onto the county road and turned north, and Mabel watched from the porch until the sound of them faded, which took a while. 63 engines take time to quiet, and then the Montana evening was its own quiet, which was different from the absence of the engines and better for the contrast. She sat down in Carl's chair. She felt the arm under her hand, the repaired arm, solid. The grain of the new wood matched to the old, the work of 4 months of a man's attention. She felt the chair hold her the way it had always held the person in it. She looked at the foothills. She looked at the yard with the fence straight and the wood stacked and the barn door hanging right. She whispered something to the foothills, or to the chair, or to Carl, or to herself. The specific whispered thing that a person says at the end of a day that was more than they expected, when the evening is quiet and there is no one to say it to, and it needs to be said anyway. Then she picked up her coffee. She was all right. She had always been all right. But this was better. If this story found something in you, if you know what it means to do a thing because it needs doing and no one else is there, and to have that noticed by someone who came back to tell you, share this today with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. And leave a comment. Have you ever done something for a stranger that you didn't think twice about, that you did because it was what was needed, and had it come back to you in a way you didn't expect? Tell us. Type barn in the comments if this one reached you. Because some debts cannot be repaid. But some people try anyway. And the trying is the whole of it.